Alright, so we've completed our cleaning of the components. We're ready to put it back together. We've already got our new clutch disc soaking in friction modifier. You want to do that for at least 30 minutes prior to putting this together. That way the clutch material will actually absorb some of the friction modifier and you won't have such a dry start out. You'll actually have some lubrication to start with. So typically I would have the new carrier bearings pressed onto the housing at this point, but we ran into a few problems with this particular carrier and getting those off. So long story short, we had to cut them off. So I'm going to have to go pick up a new set of bearings because you actually need one to press the bearings fully onto the carrier. Normally I would use the old bearing races, but in this particular case we had to destroy them to remove them. So the first thing we do, we're going to actually set this aside because the first thing we're going to need to do is take some measurements of the new clutch packs. Now typically the clutch packs will be stacked in a clutch, steel, steel, clutch, steel, steel, clutch orientation. Some people prefer more lockup than that, so I'll actually stack them in an alternating clutch steel method with an extra clutch disc in there, which is what we're going to do in this particular application. That's going to give you a little bit more friction material in there, so the differential is going to lock up a little better, a little easier. So, and this gets messy because these things have been soaking in friction modifier here. And I've already pre-selected 2 of the best clutch packs out of the differential here. So we're going to make sure only one of those is used per pack. Go ahead and drop those others back in. So we get a total of 4 clutch discs. I like to stack the old disc closest to the carrier side. So that's what I'll go down first in my stack here. Put a steel down, clutch, steel, clutch, steel. And you want to go ahead and kind of square these off, make them even. Take a small C-clamp. You're actually going to pin these together so you can get a real accurate measurement of the thickness. And when you pin these down, you don't want it super tight. Basically, just tight enough to give them a little bit of a squeeze because you don't want to skew your measurements by over-tightening your C-clamp. So make sure they're even. Just put a slight squeeze on them there. Go ahead and get your micrometer or turn it on, zero it out. You want to make sure you're measuring in inches. The maximum you typically want to go is 0.660. Any more than that, you typically have to actually tap the center pin in. So that's the number I like to shoot for, 660. Looks like this particular pack right about 0.641, 0.640. So we're going to want a 20,000 shim on this particular pack. That's going to put us right at that 0.660 number. And of course the smallest shim that we have in there is going to be a 30,000 shim. That's why I always take the old shims out of the pack. They're a little bit worn. You'll find that sometimes they're a little bit thinner. Get a measurement on this one. This one's measuring at 0.25. That'll work. We're going to be a little over what we should ideally be shooting for. A lot of that's because this used friction disc that we're putting in here is almost new. Set of a pretty low mileage traction lock. Go ahead and get this together here and we'll get another measurement on it. everything pinched down. It's coming out to 0.659. Can't ask for much better than that. Pretty much right on the money. So this one's where we want it. We're going to set that pack aside. That's going to be one of our sides there. Go ahead and get the rest of our clutch plates out of the mix here. Gonna lay down our old clutch first. Now one little tidbit of information, just in case you're wondering during your disassembly, the original Ford clutch packs, the ears that come off of them are actually squared off. So we know that this old clutch pack we're using here is an aftermarket clutch pack. It's not an original Ford one. Probably attributes to how little wear there is on it. And rebuilt at some point along its life. Again, not too tight with the C-clamp, just enough to pin it together so you can get a good accurate measurement on it. This one's coming up to 0.637. I'm going to go ahead and try this with the old shim first, just because it's a little bit more than what I would like to see. The smallest shim we've got in our rebuild kit is a 0.30. So if we're measuring 0.37, that'd put us a little more over the marker than I'd like to be. I don't want to run into any issue with the owner of this traction lock trying to get the center pin in there once the axles are installed. Try to get these as centered as possible so we got the most accurate measurement we can. Double check your zero and make sure all these measurements are accurate. Measure in 0.660, 0.660. So I got really lucky with this particular application. Both of my sides come up with a perfect 0.660. Very, very rare for something like that to happen. So we got both of our clutch packs ready to go on our actual gears here. Clean this up a little bit, get a little more working space. Alright, so you're going to take one of your gears. These are freshly cleaned up, they're completely dry, they've been cleaned with brake cleaner. We don't want to install them that way. So I'm actually going to take a little bit of our soak that we used for our clutch plates. I'm going to put some around the lining of the gear there where the clutch is going to make contact. Again, that's just going to prevent any type of dry contact or excessive friction during the first few miles of this traction lock. Get a good little coat there. Your shim always goes to the carrier side of the packing. So you're going to want your clutch directly touching the gear here. We want our oldest clutch plate farthest away from the gear. At least that's the way I prefer it. So the way we're going to stack it, it's going to be our newest plate down first. And I stack these one at a time because the steels always give you a little trouble. The brand new steels never want to go on there that easy. No, we got lucky with this one. So I found that stacking them one at a time just prevents you from getting any type of snags or hang-ups going together. You'll find that that last steel barely goes into the teeth there. We've got full coverage, but we couldn't get another steel on there if we were to, for some reason, stack this any differently. And then your shim on last. So we've got one ready to go. We'll do our other one here. Alright, let's set this aside for just a minute. Now we're going to go ahead and take our carrier. And we want to go ahead and lubricate a couple spots in it. Both places that the shims ride on either side of the carrier. And also in the little cutouts that the spider gears ride in, we're going to go ahead and get some lubrication in all of those because, again, we don't want any dry startups here. You don't have to be too critical. I mean, this stuff's going to be in the differential when you assemble it anyway, so you don't have to worry about it getting messy. One quick note too, when you're soaking your clutch plates, you'll probably find that the little 4-ounce bottle of friction modifier that they supply you with the kit isn't enough to fully cover the clutch plates in a bowl. So what I do is I add a little synthetic gear oil just to get enough in there to cover the clutch plates. Synthetic gear oil actually has friction modifier additives in it. In fact, a lot of times your first fill up or subsequent fill ups thereafter, a lot of people won't use the friction modifier, they'll just use synthetic gear oil. Essentially the friction modifier, all it's going to do is maybe reduce noise, but it's really going to induce more slippage with the clutch plates. So by running a synthetic gear oil and less friction modifier, it's just going to give you that much more lockup, if that's what you're going for. So here's the part that's always a little difficult, because you're kind of juggling a few different things at once here. Make sure all your ears are lined up. Just go ahead and set this right down in the carrier. Once it's seated, I always double check that everything's lined up. We don't have any issue. I'll even spin the gears by hand just to make sure there's no binding. And you will find that they won't spin very easily, because all that fresh friction material in there is actually preventing them from being able to spin. So that side's done. Now I'll normally do the other side first, because when you tip it, it will allow that gear to stay centered. This one's going to want to fall out, if you can see there. Hopefully we got enough tension to leave it in place while I slip this other pack in here. Just be real careful. We got it in. Make sure that it spins, which it does. Now we're going to go ahead and get our spider gear situated. Again, lubricate the insides of the spider gears when they ride against the little races or washers, whatever you want to refer to them as. This will also help kind of hold the assembly together so we're not fighting so many different moving components going back together. smell like friction modifier for a week. Smells terrible. Now a little trick we do. Get the center pin ready, because when you situate these spider gears, you want them to be exactly 180 degrees away from one another. The good way to verify that is just to slip the center pin right through them. The center pin won't go through unless they're 180 degrees out. I like to get these as close to the case as you can get them, because that's going to limit the amount of distance that you have to go to get these to actually rotate into the carrier. Now I'm going to have to fight these a little bit. Typically what I would do is actually insert an axle into one end of the carrier here and spin these gears from the inside using an axle, just by engaging the splines. That's the easiest way to do it. Unfortunately for me, I do not have a 31 spline axle available to me, so I'm going to have to fight these a little bit to get them in. So I'm going to make sure each of my gears are all the way butt back. I'm going to press these spider gears in as hard as I can while simultaneously trying to rotate them. I can already tell I'm going to be in for a fight with this one. Once you've got them partially in the carrier, they've kind of wedged themselves. If you don't have an axle available for you, you can go ahead and try to spin these gears by force. Take a flathead, wrap it up, because you don't want to scar these gears, obviously. Pinch these spider gears and try to rotate it a little bit. The tighter your clutch packs, the more resilient these things are going to be to roll into place. Go ahead and pull the center pin out, because it might be prohibiting me from getting these to walk in. There we go, the magic number. Really, it's just a matter of getting lucky, having all these gears so you're right in the right spot and they'll slip right in, and you won't believe that you've just been fighting them for the last 15 minutes. So we'll go ahead and slip our center pin through. We just want to verify that those spider gears are true. Come a little bit more over. Alright, that's good. Center pin goes through, everything's even up. You want to avoid moving these gears from here on out. Go ahead and take your center pin out. We got to get the S-spring in. A lot of people complain that this is the hardest part of the rebuild. I've been lucky, I've never really had an S-spring fight me too bad. Of course, that being said, now the time I decide to film it, this one's probably not going to want to go in. So the two flat spots of the S-spring will be oriented against the larger gears of the traction lock. I've found the best way to coerce this S-spring into place is by use of force. Take a rubber mallet. You don't want to use a sledgehammer or anything, because you don't want to ding up this S-spring, so I use a rubber mallet. And if we get lucky, we'll get it to drop into place here.